Hey folks, my name is Mo Amir and this is Van Color, British Columbia's bona fide culture and politics TV talk show right here on Check and Check Plus. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Now let's get right into it. Have you heard of Bill C11? It is proposed federal legislation to expand Canada's Broadcasting Act and give the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, the power to regulate online streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney+. In fact, it goes a step further to propose the regulation of all online audiovisual material, including videos uploaded to sites like YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. So what does this all mean and how would it affect Canadians? To help us parse through, Bill C11 is a Canadian political commentator and professional YouTuber with about 800,000 subscribers. A weekly columnist for the Washington Post. I've been following his career for many years now, and I'm so excited that he's here. He is JJ McCullough. JJ, so nice to see you.
So nice to be here.
So break it all down for us. What does this bill mean for Canadians and Canadian content creators like yourself?
Yeah, so as you said, basically what the bill aims to do is expand the jurisdiction of the CRTC, which currently has authority over radio and television in Canada,
right,
to include basically the internet and basically any sort of broadcasting platform that exists on the internet. That both includes sort of what we would think of as the more sort of corporate streaming services like Netflix and Disney+, as well as the more sort of user-generated platforms like YouTube, which I produce content for, right? So it's basically in the same sort of way that we think of the CRTC having authority over what kind of content is released on the television and radio airwaves, in what sort of quantity, not only in terms of sort of like, you know, the regulations of like getting your broadcasting license and that sort of thing, but more in terms of like what kind of content are you promoting. We know that the CRTC requires television stations in this country to air a certain quantity of Canadian content, Canadian CanCon, as we say, same with on the radio. And that is really sort of the sticking point that I think has people like me the most kind of up in arms, is this idea that the CRTC is now going to be in the business of dictating what is the Canadian content quotas that YouTube itself has to meet, and then also coming up with some sort of definition of what is Canadian enough to be promoted through some sort of revised algorithm.
So are we talking about censorship, or are we talking about the discoverability of content like yours, or the discoverability of content on Netflix? So it'll change the way your Explore page looks like on a lot of these sites.
Yeah, it's more the latter from what I understand. There are different bills that are also in the pipeline that would regulate different aspects of the internet.
Right.
But this one is much more, I would say, sort of focused on the kind of the more entertainment sort of side of the internet. So it is, and the bill uses this term quite explicitly, regulating discoverability. So the goal is to make it easier for people, ordinary users, to quote unquote discover Canadian content, whatever that means. But that has a lot of sort of professional YouTubers like myself and other content creators on TikTok and elsewhere kind of up in arms, because, you know, we've spent a lot of time trying to master the platform as it already exists.
Right, because it has its own algorithms in terms of what it shows you.
And then, you know, people kind of give themselves headaches trying to master that system, right? Like it's never super clear, you know, what makes any given video, you know, go high or low, or be easy to discover, or, you know, be popular or unpopular. I mean, a lot of this is very ambiguous. The algorithm is kind of, you know, this kind of temperamental god that no one quite really knows how to appease.
And so it sounds like the Canadian government wants to add another layer on top of the algorithms that these sites have.
Yes, precisely. That's exactly right. And so that gives a lot of people a lot of nervousness, because they don't know how they're going to be able to appease the CRTC in addition to appeasing YouTube, particularly when it comes down to the Act's stated mission statement of promoting, you know, good Canadian content. What is that going to be? We don't even know, because that definition, and there's been some reporting on this in the press recently, that definition of what is Canadian enough to be promoted wanted to be emphasized in the discoverability, that is yet to be decided. The CRTC is going to revise the definition of Canadian content at some point in the future, and then we're all going to have to play along.
So this brings me to you. You are Canadian. You're a YouTuber.
Yes.
Not all your content is, based around what's happening in Canada. You have a diversity of what you produce and topics that you touch on, but you are Canadian. So wouldn't this benefit you? I know you obviously have amassed a huge following, but wouldn't that mean that you're on more explore pages for people who have not discovered you yet?
Perhaps I am biting the hand that feeds me here, but I mean, like, there's two different ways to think about it. Well, I mean, there's many ways to think about it, but it's like, on the one hand, like, I can't take it for granted that just because my content seems Canadian, it will be deemed Canadian by the CRTC. Professor Michael Geist, who's been a big critic of this bill, on his blog, he has a lot of sort of fun examples of movies and television shows that we might think of as being Canadian, but they were not deemed Canadian enough by the CRTC's sort of esoteric standards of what Canadian really means. So on the one hand, like, I can't even take it for granted that my content, which might seem superficially Canadian, will in fact be Canadian enough to meet the CRTC's definition of Canadianness, which can factor in all sorts of variables. Like if you're using Canadian music, or if you have like a Canadian editor and that kind of thing, you get the brownie points for that. And then as well, there's, a lot of question marks regarding the content of the videos and how that will be measured, because there are sort of a lot of, I would say, more sort of ideological and politicized objectives that are spelled out in Bill C11 as well. But then the other side of things is that I do feel like an obligation to look out for the interests of Canadian content creators who are perhaps not making content that is quite so overtly Canadian as mine, because they deserve protection too. Like if you're a Canadian content creator on YouTube who wants to make like cooking videos, or you want to do like fitness tutorials or video game reviews.
You better have maple syrup in those recipes,
well, like, this is the thing, right? So it's like, these people have been extraordinarily successful making content that is appealing not only to Canadians, but to a global audience. So I very much view a lot of Bill C11 as being a bit of a solution in search of a problem. There is no obvious sign to me that Canadian content creators on YouTube in particular, who have been some of the most successful of any, nationality in the world, kind of need government's sort of paternalistic helping hand to, let them be more successful. They've been tremendously successful in this 17-year experiment, which has been an unregulated YouTube.
Right. Now, you were recently at a parliamentary committee hearing, and you were the only witness speaking against Bill C11, and you talked about it being dispiriting. So what do you mean by that? Why was it so weird?
Well, I mean, the committee process is a sort of a bit of political kabuki, like they invite you to testify. I was, from what I understand, I was invited to testify by the Conservatives because, the Conservatives are opposed to this bill. They wanted to hear somebody who was critical of the bill. I was happy to sort of play my role as far as that goes. But, this is not really, I think, in any sense, a goodwill exercise about trying to persuade politicians, right? Most of the politicians have already made up their minds. They know how they're going to vote. They're very sort of ideologically committed to the objectives of this bill in one way or another. And so when you give your testimony, you sort of see who is receptive to it. I mean, you see, half the politicians don't even listen. They're on their phones the whole time. So it is.
And you were asked about bilingualism for some reason.
Well, see, like, this is the thing too. So it's like Anthony Housefather, who's one of the Liberal members of the committee, he sort of grandstands against me, to try to discredit me because I guess I'm sort of seen as like a conservative witness, therefore I'm a bad person. So he asks me this kind of like completely gratuitous question where it's like, oh, Mr. McCullough, is it not true that you once wrote something about how you don't like bilingualism? And, he's a Quebec MP, so he's kind of posturing in that sort of way. So like the idea is like, oh, JJ, he's some sort of anti-French crackpot. Better not listen to what he has to say on this completely unrelated topic of YouTube regulation.
For those who were listening, I suppose.
Yeah, for those who were listening. No, but I mean, I'm happy that my testimony kind of had a bit of a viral moment. It's been viewed like over 400,000 times on my YouTube channel, and it's been widely quoted and publicized elsewhere. So, I would like to think that I've played at least a small role in kind of calling public attention to this bill and its deficiencies and sort of helping kickstart a sort of larger conversation, because that matters. Because if we have no faith in the parliamentary process, the committees and votes and this sort of thing, the best we can hope for is just that the public raises enough of a stink about this legislation that it at least makes the Trudeau government second guess why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. So really quickly, 30 seconds or less, give your elevator pitch to the viewer there who's going, you know what, JJ, I'm already subscribed to you. This doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. Why should Canadians who are not content creators, but content consumers, why should they care?
Well, I think that the content consumer wants to have control over their own content viewing experience. You know, a platform like YouTube, we subscribe to the channels we want to watch. The YouTube algorithm feeds us videos that they think we might be interested in. And I think that's a pretty good setup. I don't think there's a huge demand for government, for Ottawa, for the CRTC to, you know, stick its hand into this process and say, aha, Mo, we think you should be watching this because it will improve your patriotism and make you a better Canadian citizen. I don't think anyone's demanding that. And I think it seems quite abhorrent for something like that to be present in a free society.
Sure. Well, JJ, I appreciate you drawing attention to this issue. It certainly has drawn me, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Folks, that was JJ McCullough, professional YouTuber and columnist for the Washington Post. For more with him, find This is Van Color wherever you listen to your podcasts, as we're going to record some overtime to discuss conservatism in Canada. Now, after some business, is BC better prepared for extreme heat events after last year's devastating heat dome? BC Green Party MLA Adam Olsen shares his thoughts up next.